Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We have an exciting webinar coming up that I'm looking forward to discussing. But first, I have a few reminders while folks are still joining before we get started. We like to keep our webinars conversational and welcome your questions throughout. You can send the questions to the panel through the Q&A button located on your Zoom control panel. We'll try to answer as many as we can live, but if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. You can also follow today's conversation on Twitter, as we will be live tweeting throughout the webinar. Our Twitter handle is @Rio_SEO, and we'll be using #RioWebinar. Finally, we'll send a link to the webinar recording within the next 24 hours, so look out for a follow-up email from our marketing team. All right, let's jump in. So Rio SEO and Forsta recently analyzed Google Business Profile Insights across 64,000 US business locations to gain a holistic understanding of the macroeconomic, health, and other external factors that impacted retailers' local performance for the first half of 2022. Through exploring these findings today, our hope is your retail brand will have more transparency into how your performance compares to other national retailers throughout the first half of 2022, as well as forecast what search trends to anticipate for the end of the year. We'll also discuss how improving your customer experience strategy can help sales and improve retention. To help me dive a little deeper into the findings today, I'm joined by a great panel of experts who have in-depth experience working closely with some of the largest global retail brands. My name is Mark Porter. I'm an account director at Rio SEO, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Joining me today are Howard Lax, PhD, and principal consultant at Forsta, and Ryan Weber, director of customer success at Rio SEO. Howard, would you mind going ahead and introducing yourself and give the audience a brief background on your experience working with retail clients?
Sure, thanks, Mark. So I've been in and around customer experience work from both the client and the supplier side for the better part of the last 25 years, worked across the spectrum of industries, B2B and B2C, with some significant work in the retail space with chains and franchise operations in various parts of the country and around the world. Over to you, Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks, Howard, and thanks, Mark. Yeah, Ryan Weber. I lead the client success team here at Rio, as Mark said. I've been with Rio for about 7 years, and I've been in the digital marketing space for closer to 15. As part of our work on the client success team at Rio, we focus a lot on reporting for our clients, right? So the metrics from Google that we'll be looking at today make up a big part of that reporting work. And one thing that I think is really helpful as we have those conversations with clients is zooming out and looking at the broader sort of vertical data as a sort of benchmark for each of our individual clients, right? To give them a sense of context and how they sort of stack up against the industry. So looking forward to reviewing that data with everyone here today.
Great. Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate that. Once again, thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to pass it over to Howard, who will talk us through how customer experience impacts retailers in different ways, including growing revenue.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to set the stage before we jump into the actual Google data with a little bit of contextual information on the impact of CX on business. For us, CX is a business strategy. It drives value to the firms in a number of ways. What we'll see is that customers who have better experiences give those firms that they enjoy those experiences with a larger share of their spend. They're much more open to buying more expensive types of products. They recommend the company, so it drives customer acquisition, and they are much more likely to stay with those firms. There's some folks who argue also that Better customer experiences can lower costs. There are some examples of that, but for the most part, the focus of customer experience as a business strategy is as a way to drive revenue and value to the bottom line. Sometimes it helps driving lower costs, but in many instances, companies invest in customer experience. So costs may actually increase, but it's offset by more than a greater increase in revenue. So I have two follow-up slides just to briefly illustrate the difference in economic value that some clients of ours have seen from better customer experiences. And what this slide illustrates very, very clearly is pretty simple. This is a mass market retailer, and what they saw was that customers with the best experience were spending more than 3 times over the course of the year than customers who had poor or weaker experiences. So they spent more, and as you see, they also shopped far more often. So spend, recency, and frequency of visits to the store were driven arithmetically higher by the increase in the quality of the customer experience. And the next slide is the last one I want to show you before we dig into the Google data, takes it from the customer level to the store level. So what does it mean when the store delivers a better customer experience? So what this slide illustrates is for a chain that has, I don't know if it's 1,000 or 1,500 stores. And what they did was simply, we took the number of stores, we divided them into quartiles, right? From the worst experience ratings from their customers to the best experience ratings. And what we saw was that the top performing stores in terms of customer experience, they were growing at 2% more per quarter in terms of the growth. That 2% annual sales is an incorrect, it's actually quarter over quarter. Excuse me. It compounded to over 8% a year. So what we see here is that customers that stores with the best experience growing at a rate of 2% per quarter faster than stores with the worst experience. For this particular retailer, that translated into $300,000 a year more in revenue for stores that were delivering good experiences. So before we jump into the data, I just want to leave you with that in the back of your mind. CX is a business strategy to drive value to the store and to create bottom line growth. Back to you.
Thanks, Howard. That's great information. Let's switch gears a bit, dive into the white paper's findings. To start, we'll give you some context around our methodology. For each retail location, we track the following: local organic search volume, local search map pack views, clicks on a map pack listing, clicks to a website, clicks to make a phone call, and clicks for driving directions. Again, we looked at local search data for over 64,000 US business locations, and this was across 66 different US enterprise retail brands. So let's take a look at conversion trends. Total clicks reflect the volume of all conversion actions tracked in Google Business Profile Insights, including clicks from directions to the website and to call the location. From this data, unsurprisingly, conversions from search dropped after the holidays, reaching a low in February. Clicks for directions have grown throughout the first half of the year as consumers are willing to return to in-store shopping experience in greater numbers. Clicks to the website and clicks to call, however, have remained relatively stable and trended together. So I'm going to ask a few questions to the panel here. Are the declines seen in conversions in the beginning of the year cause for concern? Maybe Howard, will start with you.
Sure, thanks, Mark. I mean, this is a marketplace that can be only characterized as unprecedented. I know that that's an adjective that's used far too often, but the reality is, you have a market with this incredible pent-up demand simultaneously matched with supply chain and supply disruptions. You have, on the one hand, crippling levels of inflation relative to normal economic life in the US. But on the flip side of that, you have job creation at a pace that hasn't been seen in 40 years. We have the lowest rate of unemployment in well, ever. From an economist's point of view, we have what they consider to be full employment. So I don't know that I would say that this is, a unique cause of concern. It's just there are so many factors that are simply unpredictable that you can't worry about what is beyond your control at the moment. The best you could do is manage within the parameters of those factors that you can control. We can't control inflation, we can't control war, we can't control supply chain. So the best that retailers can do is manage the marketplace on a day-to-day, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter basis.
Thanks, Howard. And Ryan, how are retailers able to power through some of the macroeconomic factors impacting the country at the start of the year, such as the war in Ukraine and rising inflation?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Howard, with everything you pointed out there. I think there's another thing that's happening here as well, right? And it's sort of this shift in consumer behavior, right? There was, a huge uptick in kind of pandemic-driven demand for e-commerce over the last 2 years. And one of the things that stands out to me here is if you look at how each of the click types sort of recovered from that, post-holiday peak that we see in January, clicks for driving directions, is pulling away at a faster pace. And if you were to look at this data from a year ago or 2 years ago, it's the opposite, right? So I think this recovery, or this shift, I should say, in consumer behavior away from, either I'm more comfortable or I have to purchase everything online, to, hey, I have the option now to go back into stores, right? I think we're seeing that trend sort of play out in this data. I think that'll continue into the second half of the year as well. But that was the thing that jumped out at me most, is this sort of consumer behavior shift away from e-commerce and toward in-store shopping. And as far as, the question about, is that a concern for retailers? I mean, I would say the trend itself isn't necessarily a concern, but it's definitely important for retailers to be aware of it, right? And to be optimizing that customer experience for either the hybrid, online to offline, or just the pure, offline or in-store shopper. And it's kind of the opposite of what they've been focusing on for the last 2 years.
Sure. Great information. Thanks, Ryan and Howard. Let's take a look at local searches and listings views. So we saw much greater fluctuations when looking at search data compared to conversion data. Local searches fell 20% following the holidays. April ushered in a rebound as retail sales in the US rose 0.9% despite universally climbing prices for goods. Searches and retail listings views tend to trend close together, as we can see from this data. So Howard, why do you think searches and views for retail listings rose so drastically in April after somewhat of a challenging February and initial part of March?
Well, I mean, there's a traditional passing of the holiday hangover.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's face it, it's not that everybody blows everything they have by the end of December. That basically means, January and February they're just always lean. When people finally recover. Plus, of course, you have the shift in the weather that takes people out of the doldrums a little bit, and you have some of those early spring sales with seasonal shopping trends kicking in. I mean, this looks like the kind of graph that you'd probably see pretty much mirrored year in, year out in terms of those trends.
Yeah, great points, Howard. Ryan, anything you'd like to add to that?
Ryan?
Yeah, no, agree again with Howard. I think the other thing to point out, it's not, pictured here, but one of the big drivers in the growth in, March and into April was map views, right? And again, it plays into that concept that consumers getting more comfortable, going out and about again, physically going to stores. Map views typically mean, you're on a mobile device, maybe using the Google Maps app. That's driving a lot of these views and impressions. I think that aligns closely with what Howard pointed out there.
Great, thanks, guys. All right, let's dive a little deeper into month over month and year over year analysis in the first half of 2022, looking specifically at the months where we saw the greatest fluctuations in search traffic and conversions. January saw sharp declines month over month across all metrics we measure, but I think it's important to note the year over year increases we saw across the board. And you guys kind of already touched on this, but what do you think retailers, why do you think retailers saw such significant growth year over year in January? Ryan, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is hopefully an obvious one, right? I mean, you look at the month-on-month drivers, clearly seasonality, right? December is typically the peak month of the year, so it's incredibly hard to compete with that for January performance, right? So month-on-month, certainly driven by seasonality, but year on year, again, we have to go back to the sort of where we were as an economy, right? And as a in terms of the pandemic a year ago, things were still, fairly tight, right? In January of 21. So I think that's the big, driver behind the year-on-year data is shifts in sort of the phase of the pandemic recovery. But yeah, again, it's sort of emblematic of the broader trend, right, that we'll see through the first half of this year.
Thanks, Ryan. Howard, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Just building on what Ryan had said, 2021 was actually a good year for business, recovering from the 2020 doldrums that we went through. The economy grew by about 6% in 2021, which was, again, the fastest growth we've seen in decades, especially in the second half of the year. But the month-to-month data is month-to-month data is always brutal. People are always looking for trends from month to month, and the data gets revised, and those month-to-month insights are always almost like a search for an explanation to what has already happened. And by the time you find an explanation, it's already out the window because the next month is upon you, and the data is moved in a different direction, surprised you yet again.
Thanks, Howard. Well, let's take a look at February. We saw the opposite of January with month-to-month and year-over-year figures mostly down. We know we contribute this somewhat to rising costs for essential goods for why the month-over-month figures were down. But any insights why you think year-over-year figures were down as well in February? Maybe Howard, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, by this time in 2022, we're seeing, in February of 2022, the first half, inflation had opened at already 7 to 8%. By comparison, inflation at the first half of 2021 was at 2 to 3%. And people feel that pinch, most obviously in necessities and things like gas and food. So by 2022, we are seeing, again, also at this point in time, however you define a recession, we are beginning to see the economy as a whole contract. So I think this is, just a byproduct of that. There's less money around chasing higher prices. That's not a recipe for growth in general.
Understood. Thanks, Howard. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, again, building off of Howard's comments there, I think what we see in the only two areas that do show growth here, the views driven by map views, clicks for directions, obviously indicating folks are physically going out and making purchases again. I think it ties into Howard made the comment about sort of the essential versus non-essential, right? And some of those maybe nice to have purchases being put on the back burner. I think when you're looking at grocery, for example, right, we don't have data broken out by sub vertical here, specialization, types of retailers, but I think that's one of the areas that you're going to see if not growth, at least sustained demand, right, for sort of those essentials. And I think the uptick in map views and clicks for directions is sort of indicative of that. Whereas again, there's kind of a pullback in the other types of engagement, views, and conversions.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And just a quick reminder for the audience, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A button and we'll get to those. But let's go ahead and take a look at March. So March is when we saw retailers month over month, local marketing metrics really start to recover. Total searches were up 18%, total listing views were up 13%, and total clicks were up 14% month over month when compared to February. Ryan, you're on a roll there. We'll turn back to you. What do you think the turning point was for the rebound for retailers in March?
Yeah, I mean, it plays into, when we looked at the overview slide at the beginning, right? You're getting some sort of benefit of seasonality, that holiday hangover is kind of waning, right? And demand is starting to pick up again for, seasonal reasons. I think one of the things when we look at the year-on-year data, and this is important to point out, as it's been a while now, folks may have forgotten, but one of the big sort of drivers of engagement in GMB and GBP with these local listings was folks either looking to find information, and that's indicated by clicks to the website, but also folks looking to verify information, and that was driven by clicks to call. And so over the last 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, we saw huge increases year on year over 2019 and prior in those clicks to call and clicks through to the website. I think we've sort of gotten past that point of information uncertainty, right? Where in general, folks are seeing clicks to call down, pretty regularly in the retail vertical, and I think clicks to website sort of following that trend as well. And I think one of the drivers there is the fact that we're now sort of through the point of questioning that first level of data, right, that folks are seeing across Google listings. So I think that's one of the drivers here for that year-on-year decrease that we're seeing for March.
Cool, thanks, Ryan. Howard, would you like to add some additional insight into the reasoning behind this rebound?
Sure. Let me focus on the year over year first, because those numbers are still down. And at this point in time, we're seeing gas hit $4 a gallon, perhaps for the first time ever in the United States. The year prior, gas was $3 a gallon. That's a huge increase. When do you see a 33% increase in prices in a single year? And of course, month over month, let's face it, February was so abysmal that March almost had to look better than that. And despite inflation clouds at this point, economists were still, and the Federal Reserve were shocked by the level of job creation and continued strong employment numbers, and unemployment continued to tick down. So you have these bifurcated impacts on the economy. You have these storm clouds of inflation and rising costs married to, surges in just the workforce and in spending. So, once again, you have this dichotomy between the monthly shifts and the year over year numbers. And, I think that makes perfect sense in light of what has happened.
Thanks, Howard. Great insight. Well, let's go ahead and jump into June. So, and really the conclusion of our research. So we see retailers' local marketing metrics stayed strong in April and May, only to dip once again in June 2022. Ryan, why do you think the sudden shift back down in June?
Yeah, I think, this is, in a way, this is a repeat a little bit of what we saw in February, right? We had this, in that, looking at the overview, the total 6-month view, this huge jump back, right, in March and April. May was relatively flat. And so in a way, I think the monthly figures, were bound to decrease a little bit. And as far as, the year-on-year figures, again, it aligns really closely with this consumer behavior shift away from, the e-commerce, clicks to the website and clicks to call, and toward that in-store shopping, right? With views, again, mostly driven by map views, folks that are on the go, and then clicks for driving directions, people physically going back to shop again. And I think that, is one of the strongest, just from a local search standpoint, and commerce standpoint, one of the strongest themes throughout the first half of the year, is that kind of shift in consumer behavior. And I think June really sums that up pretty cleanly.
Thanks, Ryan. Howard, do you have any additional color you'd like to add here?
Sure. By this time, gas is $5 a gallon. If $4 a gallon was considered to be a shocker to the American bloodstream, $5 a gallon was something no one ever would have forecast. Add to that, inflation hits 9% by June. So you've got the double whammy, and it takes its toll. And by this time, you have economists saying we are in a recession. People hear that. It's not that people are saying, people aren't measuring whether we're in a recession, but constant negative news takes its toll. People become a little bit more wary, a little bit more conservative. So, these numbers basically, I think, reflect, both the mindset of the American consumer, who was increasingly depressed at this point by costs, and the messaging they were constantly getting from economists and government sources.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. And I'll just say, here in California, we would welcome $5 a gallon in gas. We're seeing the first digit as a 7. So yeah, it's even certainly impacting us even more out here on the West Coast. All right, so we recognize that many factors outside are impacting retailers holistically, from increasing costs, gas, inventory shortages, and higher prices are driving down consumption. According to recent Salesforce research, 51% of consumers plan to purchase fewer holiday gifts this year. So Howard and Ryan, we'll ask you both, what final takeaways or closing thoughts would you have for brands based on the research finding we've discussed so far, and what you predict for retailers as we close out 2022? Howard, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Well, first, keep in mind, fewer gifts don't necessarily translate into smaller overall spend. I mean, at the end of the day, you monetize the dollars spent, not necessarily just the number of items purchased. Second, I don't think anyone's got a grasp on this economy. There's a great book, Fooled by Randomness, by his last name is Taleb, Taleb. And he basically says that everybody makes predictions. And in the scheme of things, if enough people make enough predictions, someone is always right. It's sort of like, thinking about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from Shakespeare and flipping a coin. It's a 50-50 chance. But if you flip it often enough, with enough people flipping it often enough people guessing often enough, someone's always right. They look like a genius, but in reality, anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen with the American economy probably is someone you shouldn't be listening to, because there are so many uncontrollable factors. We've got these 3 wild cards. The war in the Ukraine. What's that going to do to supply chains? What about OPEC and oil production? Another wild card. And of course, the Federal Reserve and movements on interest rates. Are they going to basically prompt a recession prematurely? Are they going to, there are some people that argue that to get interest rates down, unemployment has to reach 6%. Well, unemployment's at like 3.5%. To go to 6%, that'd be millions of more people unemployed. And I'm not sure if that means the cure is worse than the problem or what, but you have these conflicting forces, and there's these wild cards that I'd be a fool to try to predict. And finally, let me leave you with this. There are lots of things about the business environment that one doesn't control. You don't control what the weather's like. You don't control what the macroeconomic environment is like. You could only control those things that are in your forces. And the biggest thing you could control is the experience that you deliver to your customers. So work within the parameters and the box that you can control. Go back to those first few slides where I illustrated better experiences translate into higher customer sales, higher customer retention, increased traffic and increased sales at the store level. And yes, if the overall economy implodes, things might still turn south, but you're going to be better prepared to weather that storm if your customer experience is keeping your customers engaged and bringing value to the firm.
Great. Thanks, Howard. And Ryan, thoughts from you as we look to close out 2022?
Yeah, I mean, again, agree with everything that Howard shared there. I think to focus on the customer experience and exactly what is in retailers' control as we go into the holiday season. A couple things to keep in mind, right? When you look at the data, impressions are still up, right? So this is as important and competitive a battlefield as ever. And we know that if you look at Google's strategy, local is a core part of that, right? And I see there's a question here that Nikita put in the Q&A asking about multi-search near me. That's a perfect example, right? Multi-search, you look at AR and the enhancements that are coming to Google Maps. You look at local product inventory. I think there's a lot of tools that Google is making available. And again, when you think of their strategy, from a retail shopping and advertising standpoint, Amazon is competitor number one, right? And what does Google have that Amazon doesn't? It's all these brick and mortar listings, places that you can, not get 2-day or next day delivery, but you can go pick it up in 20 minutes, right? So thinking through, how can you remove friction from that process for customers? I mean, managing your listings, that's the entryway, right? Having all that basic listing data, but going beyond that also and looking at attributes, right? Fulfillment services, you have curbside pickup, buy online, pickup in store. Brands should absolutely be leveraging Google Posts. You think of the billions of impressions that happen, across local search and maps. That's just free real estate, right? For you to get, whether it's promotions or just even brand marketing, messaging out to consumers, should absolutely be leveraging Google Posts. And then finally, like I said, local inventory. There's a obvious trend that Google is putting more emphasis on actual shopping, right? Between the Google Shopping experience, local inventory ads, see what's in store. Something enterprise retailers, many are there now, but it's something that I think is going to continue to grow in importance, is that see what's in store, making sure your inventory is up to date and synced with your Google listing. It's even looking like that's a ranking factor now, right? Or a ranking signal to Google. They updated their, one of their support pages in terms of, folks asking, how do I improve my ranking in Google? Well, having your local inventory linked to your listing seems like, that's one of the things that's going to improve ranking now, and it'll certainly have an impact on conversions as well. So yes, there's all these macroeconomic factors happening. I think Howard covered that really well, but focusing on what is in your control and kind of going down that list, the brands that are doing those things are the ones that are going to stand out, and I think are going to win, right, this holiday season.
Thanks, Ryan. You know what? Let's touch on that question from Nikita and Howard to give you a chance to answer too. And the question really was, Google unveiled its new multi-search near me, enabling you to take a picture of an unfamiliar item, like a plant, then find it at a local place nearby, like a gardening shop. How much disruption do you see this impacting the local space, especially for businesses not optimizing their GBP imagery ahead of the curve? Any thoughts on that, Howard? And we're just kind of throwing this out. Any ideas?
I'm a measurement geek. So I'm going to fess up, Nikita, and say that I haven't measured this as yet, because it really is too new to have affected the folks with whom I'm working.
Sure.
So I really, I really don't have any data from which to pontificate. So I'm gonna leave it at what Ryan said and pass the baton back.
Yeah, and Ryan, anything else
Yeah.
you want to add specifically to that question?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, blends in with, some of the other sort of enhancements, right, and changes that Google's making. Another theme is that search is becoming more visual, both in terms of how consumers are searching. I mean, you gave the example of someone snapping a photo of a plant and saying, where can I go and, buy a plant like this? It's a great use case, but also the results themselves are becoming more visual, and that's local search, it's Google Shopping, having high quality, professionally shot imagery 100% will help your brand stand out from the folks that are using whether it's stock photos or maybe it's outdated imagery. So yeah, there's a couple themes sort of converging there in terms of inventory data, but also imagery. And I think it's a great question and something that brands should absolutely be thinking about.
I will add this. People tend to pigeonhole CX as thinking about this is what happens when I walk in the store. You really need to take a broad perspective and think of customer experience as that entire journey from when you first consider a brand and shop around, look at it, go into the store or go online and then actually purchase and use and get serviced on whatever product or service it is. So it's the full continuum. So, this just points to that continuum isn't just when I click online and look at what the website is or walk in the store and see what's on the shelf. It starts way before that and continues long after that.
Great. Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Ryan. Well, that wraps it up for today. We've covered a lot of ground, and we hope you found our study's findings useful. We weren't able to touch on all of our findings, but we will be sending out a recording and a copy of our white paper to you shortly. If there are any questions we didn't get to, we'll make sure to follow up afterwards. We'd also be happy to answer any questions you didn't get a chance to ask. If you'd just like to send us a note at hello@rioseo.com. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's discussion, and a special thank you to our panelists, Howard and Ryan, for taking the time to be with us today. It was my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. And please keep in mind, we host these types of local search discussions every month and are hosting another webinar in a few weeks on Wednesday, November 16th, where we'll be discussing photo optimization for multi-location businesses. You can register for that one by visiting rioseo.com. Thank you again, and have a great day.